tarde, sejam muito bem-vindos à Fundação Rui Cunha. Estamos a minutos de dar início ao nosso primeiro webinar, desta feita sobre o direito do jogo em Macau e, designadamente, o futuro da indústria do jogo em Macau. Este primeiro CRED-DM Webinar faz parte de um ciclo de conferências, às quais a Fundação apelidou Conversas Digitais, precisamente porque vamos passar a utilizar estes novos canais de comunicação à distância para estarmos um bocadinho mais próximo de vós. Após um longo período de suspensão de atividades, força da crise pandémica que a todos nos assolou, é com agradável e redobrada satisfação que a Fundação regressa ao contacto com todos vós. E para esta primeira sessão, e porque Macau é a nossa casa, não poderíamos deixar de abordar um tema que direta ou indiretamente nos toca, que é o futuro da indústria do jogo em Macau. Indústria essa que é o mote económico da nossa cidade e do nosso território. À medida que a cidade vai emergindo, procurando os melhores caminhos para um futuro próximo, muitos são aqueles que se perguntam acerca do novo normal que despontará quando esta crise acabar. E isso também acontece nesta indústria económica, na indústria do jogo, não é? Responsabilidade social corporativa, sustentabilidade, são palavras-chave rumo à tão almejada recuperação económica. Por isso mesmo, Macau Gaming Industry Beyond Covid-19 é, pois, um mote para esta conversa digital, que começará dentro de minutos, às 6 da tarde, e que se prolongará no máximo de 2 horas, até às 20, e que contará com 3 oradores, tal como vem anunciado. Não é? O professor Carlos Noronha, o Dr. Alidad Tash e o Dr. Oscar Madureira. Como moderador, vamos ter o José Carlos Matias. Estas conversas digitais, este ciclo de conferências tem uma novidade. A novidade é estarmos o mais próximo de vocês e para isso criámos, para além deste canal que estou a utilizar agora, que é o Facebook e é onde poderão assistir, como sempre, a todas as nossas transmissões live. Quem quiser estar um bocadinho próximo mais próximo e quem quiser participar ativamente nestas conversas digitais, inclusivamente na de hoje, poderá ainda registar-se no link que consta em todas as publicidades e, ao registar-se, poderá participar ativamente, fazendo perguntas, sendo promovido temporariamente ao orador e, dessa forma, funciona como se estivéssemos a realizar uma conferência presencial. Resta-me dizer que estas conversas digitais correspondem a um ciclo novo de conferências, as quais irão ser realizadas periodicamente, e sempre com temas da atualidade, não só da realidade de Macau, mas também do contexto internacional em que Macau também se insere. Conversas digitais essas que não serão todas realizadas em língua inglesa, como é óbvio, outras tantas serão realizadas em português ou em língua chinesa. São, pois, todos muito bem-vindos à nossa nova sala virtual da Fundação Rui Cunha. E ficamos aqui deste lado a aguardar os vossos comentários, as vossas opiniões e, fundamentalmente, as vossas sugestões, designadamente para futuros temas de conversas digitais. Obrigada e espero que gostem.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, whenever you're watching us. We warmly welcome you to the very first installment of Rui Cunha Foundation's Digital Talk series. I'd like first of all to thank Mr. Rui Cunha, the president of the foundation, and the staff of the foundation for this kind invitation to be the moderator, the chair of this very first webinar. So it's a brand new experience for most of us in a rather brave new world, in an unprecedented situation that all of us were living. So my first words are of solidarity with, at a global scale, with all those who are going through a very hard time. Of course, wishing that the situation will improve rapidly or as soon as possible, taking into account and bearing in mind that it will take time. But we can see, of course, an impact all across the board at a global scale of this unprecedented crisis brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. These are unprecedented challenges, perhaps once in a lifetime ones at a global scale, which are taking a heavy toll on people's lives and businesses. Macau's core industry, gaming, has been through a very hard time, has been dealt a massive blow. And as the city is weathering the storm, all eyes are on what one can call the new normal, which hopefully will surface once the crisis is over. And that's why we're here and we're holding this panel discussion to talk about it. We would like to welcome all of you who are watching us via Facebook Live, and also the dozens, nearly 100 participants who are joining us via Zoom. My first word, of course, will go also to our distinguished guests. Three experts, they have in common a commitment to Macau, they have in common a keen interest in Macau's development and obviously in Macau's core industry, gaming and tourism. They come from diverse backgrounds. Two of them are physically in Macau, and the third one is joining us from Portugal. So I'd like to start by introducing our three guest speakers. Carlos Noronha is an associate professor in accounting at the University of Macau's Faculty of Business Administration. He has been conducting extensive research on taxation, social accounting, and corporate social responsibility, with an emphasis on the city's gaming industry and the operators. Carlos Noronha is also vice chairman of the executive council at the Macau Institute for Corporate Social Responsibility in Greater China, which is a partner in this webinar. We are joined by several members of this institute and also by a number of University of Macau students. Oscar Alberto Madureira is joining us from Portugal. He is currently a lawyer and head of the Portuguese desk of Rato, Ling, Lei and Cortes Lawyers Office, and a member of the Macau Lawyers Association, as well as of the Portuguese Bar Association. On top of that, he's also a member of the Hong Kong Institute of Arbitrators and of the Guangdong Justice Department as a cross-border Macau lawyer. He has previously worked as a senior legal counsel at Macau. Oscar Madureira is also a member of the Scientific Council of Rui Cunha Foundation and a visiting professor of gaming law at Portugal's Catholic University, as well as other institutions. A note also on Oscar's resume, last year he was a guest consultant to the Brazilian Parliament to discuss issues related to the country's new gaming law. And last not the least, we are joined by Alan Tash. He has 20 years of gaming experience and has been a senior executive at Venetian and Melco Resorts in Las Vegas and in Macau, overseeing analytics and gaming operations. He is currently the founder and managing director at 28 Limited, an international gaming and integrated resorts consultancy specializing in Japan, Korea, Macau, and Europe. So welcome, three of you. Welcome you all, those of you who are joining us, the attendees, dozens who are joining us via Zoom. And Alan, Tash, I'll throw in the first question. Is this the end of the world as we know it? And do you feel fine?
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for a very nice introduction. An interesting question. Is this at the end of the world? It is definitely the end of the pre-COVID world as we know it, because I highly doubt that the effect of this COVID virus will be gone and evaporate as some people may inaccurately estimate. This is going to cut deep, this is going to cut long, and the recovery from this is going to be quite different. And I think the world will be known, much like 9/11, pre and post 9/11, this will be also a pre and post COVID world, at least for the next 10, 15 years. Not that the effect will be felt for the next 10, 15 years, but just that there is this devastation that has been caused economically, uprooting people's lives, poverty around the world, which will affect far more people than the disease itself. So there will definitely be a new, we're now entering a during and pretty soon a post-COVID world where we will try to figure out a way to exit and try to go back as close to normal as possible. Will there be some industries that will go back to 100% normal? Sure, there are a few. Will there be some that will be devastated? Yes, there will be a few, such as the cruise industry will never be the same. And there are some pessimists amongst us that think that gaming will take quite some time for it to come back. And if it does, will it ever go back? It may take a long time before it goes back, perhaps in a hybrid form where some of the other factors, social distancing, will be taken to, will take effect. So some industries will thrive. Industries that were due to happen 10, 15 years from now are going to happen 2 or 3 years from now. What this COVID-19 has proven is that it's a great accelerator. What would have gone away in 10 years is probably going to go away in a year. What would have taken 10, 15 years to adapt, perhaps 20% threshold on working from home, that may have seemed to have happened sometimes in 2030, 2035, is going to happen much sooner. So this has been one of the interesting features of this COVID-19, is that we're getting to the future a little bit faster.
Thank you, Alidad. Carlos, you are born in Macau. You've been going through other crises, but let's say, for instance, you've witnessed what happened in the say, for instance, in the 1990s, and also what happened in the aftermath of the SARS crisis. Of course, there's no way we can compare where we are with where we were back then. But you've experienced the pre-boom Macau before the liberalization of the gaming industry. What's your take on where we are and where we're heading?
Thank you, Jose. Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be here, to be talking about my perspectives and also my research with my collaborators. Concerning your question, basically, my viewpoint is that through this crisis, actually, we are looking into history, and we are sort of in the history, I mean, at the present, and projecting into the future. And this gives a very good example in our lives to experience. So different times, and at different times, the idea is that we can observe that we have different what we call worlds, and the different worlds have different worths. Okay, so that is the conceptual foundation that I'm going to explain, try to explain the phenomenon, that how different worlds actually bring up different words and how they compromise and how they do not compromise, and as a result, try to project into the future that what is going to be the new world, and what is to be the meaning of CSR, corporate social responsibility, after this crisis. Well, I'm sure that many people are talking about this topic about the gaming operators, whether they are doing enough or not enough, I don't know, okay? But during this crisis, but I'm going to take a rather distanced position or stance, trying to open up some paths or avenues for today's participants to think about, say, the meaning of CSR, right? So, and also how much, for instance, how much CSR is enough, okay? And also, I would like to open up the floor to the people attending today to probably express their ideas about, well, are the gaming operators doing good or not? But, well, it's difficult to say, all right? But let's see how it evolves during this talk, all right?
That's right. Corporate social responsibility has been ranking pretty high in the official discourse, the rhetoric of local officials, and also, of course, of the gaming operators. And we're going to take a look into what's been going on and how much of a transformational effect will this crisis have on the casino operators' approach to corporate social responsibility. Oscar, you're joining us from Portugal, northern Portugal, which is an area which is deeply affected by COVID-19. You were based in Macau for a number of years, and you're still working pretty closely with the Macau affairs. What's on your crystal ball, if I may challenge you?
First of all, I would like to have one, but allow me to say thank you to Rui Cunha Foundation, especially to Filipe Guadalupe, that for the invitation to participate in this webinar. I've been with the foundation since day one, so for me, it's I feel very proud to also participate in this first event. I'd like to also say hello and good morning to the panel and to all people that are watching us. I don't have a crystal ball, and I unfortunately I would like to. I would stay in Macau if I had one, and hope that I could use that in Baccarat. But I totally agree with what Alidad said. Yesterday's IMF report, talk about this crisis for the first time at IMF level, and they call it the Great Lockdown, the worst economic downturn since Great Depression. But I trust that one should stay optimistic to what the world and mankind or people's kind can make after to this crisis. We are known to greatly adapt to new circumstances, and this is an example of what we can do. Probably this conference will not be possible, will not be made if we were not pressed by this moment. So yes, indeed, we are going to face several problems and deep problems in future. But man and people needs to be able to adapt to the new world. And of course, gaming industry is not different from the rest of the industries or for the rest of the social life contents. I don't think that the solution for instance, for gaming will be online only. Okay, we may talk about different topics and solutions later on, but even for land-based casinos need to reinvent themselves, and this is something that we are going to talk. The solution will not go through a different direction. Solution for gaming will not be online only. I mean, we need to continue our path. We need to continue what we've been doing until now. So industry needs to go on and needs to go further. But this needs to. We will have to reinvent ourselves to continue doing our own activities. Let's say, yeah.
So thank you, Oscar. Alidad, let me now also, in line with what Oscar was saying and what Carlos was hinting at, let me ask you to put your strategic mind, or the mind of a strategist that you are at work, your hat on, and presume you're working for one of the gaming concessionaires. What would you do to minimize, if I may ask you, minimize loss, generate profit against such hard and such an unprecedented, challenging environment?
I don't envy. That's an interesting question. I don't envy the 6 concessionaires heads, senior management at this moment. But in a way, they're somewhat luckier than some of the other gaming companies around the world. Las Vegas is going to have a much more difficult time. So will Korea's foreigner-only casinos. They're going to have a little bit harder time. The only good news regarding this is that relative to the other gaming jurisdiction, Macau is still going to be tied to China. And the hope for a recovery is most likely going to be sooner for China, as it was during the global financial crisis, than it is for the rest of the world. Because first of all, we have one leader in China. It moves uniformly. The government orders the banks to lend, and they will lend. There is no 50-state solution and challenges going back and forth, red state, blue states. It's just one uniform country, and they will go and do something about making sure that people, when they open the roads, they will open the roads. When they have the airplanes, they will come. That said, the companies, the current 6 concessionaires, are bleeding money. Labor is costing an arm and a leg. The revenues are now somewhere between 80 to 95% down from last year. That is going to be devastating. Within the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to get quarterly results for first quarter. And the numbers are going to be quite cushioned. They're going to be only down 30, 40, 50%. And people are going to say, oh, it wasn't as bad as people thought. But that's simply because the first 27, 28 days of January were so fantastic that if you look at what happened in February, business being down 80 to 90, and this month is trending on 95%, is going to be devastating. The challenge they also have is, unlike in Las Vegas, where you're allowed to lay people off, with minimal pushback from the leaders, the political leaders, in Macau, you simply cannot go ahead and lay people off if they happen to be locals. And that's a predominantly large portion of the workforce. At Melco, 5,000 dealers, or table games department was the largest department at 5,000 dealers. And they have a monopoly, with the exception of 2, 3, maybe a handful of foreigners at the super senior levels within the table games department. Everybody else was from Macau. And the Macau government will simply not allow them to be laid off, or it would be do so at the last resort. So what that means is that the people who are not local Macau locals are going to be suffering. So this is almost a forced move. Senior management is going to have to take pay cuts. That's the best case. Worst case, they will have a 100% full pay cut, basically be laid off. Unpaid leave is somewhere in the middle. Blue cards, people from foreign destinations, foreigners who are here on a work visa, could easily, unfortunately, I use the wrong term easily, but it is much easier for Macau operators to get rid of or furlough or lay off a foreign worker than to do so in Macau. Being a small, almost quote-unquote village is going to be quite devastating. So the real cost is going to be labor. That's the real fixed cost that takes to operate. Everything else, turning on the air conditioning, turning on the electricity, all those are going to be minimal compared to the actual labor that they're cutting. So the real question is, how are you going to go ahead and manage on the cutting cost portion? Who do you cut first? Do you force unpaid leave on everybody first? Then you go into the senior management and then management, and then you go last. That's the hierarchy that you're going to be working on. As far as revenue generation, there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
Macau doesn't require revenue generation. It is right next to 1.4 billion people who love gambling. There is hardly any gambling within China. All that's going to happen is the same hotel rooms that were turning away medium-sized players on a Saturday night are now going to be welcoming them. The same people who were just saying, sorry, you can only come on a Tuesday, we're too busy for you, are now going to be welcome. Will that alleviate the problem? No, it will get some crowds, it will get some revenue, but will it go back to the good old days? It will be some time before that happens.
Talking about the good old days and coming back to the rationale behind the liberalization of the gaming industry in Macau, some 16 to 17 years ago, one of the driving forces behind it was a need to overhaul the model, like to turning into, first of all, way less dependent on hardcore gambling, way less dependent on VIP, on high rollers, and a shift towards mass market and the non-gaming elements of casino resorts. You need mass tourism for that. Alidad, this is a huge challenge. Do you think there's a risk of us coming at least partially back to those days where, well, casinos were mostly all about hardcore gambling?
What you are seeing right now is, you go to the casinos right now, they're nearly empty. They're generating 1/20 what they did last year. The people who are there are hardcore gamblers. There are some locals, some people are trapped, but think about this. If you're sitting in Hong Kong, for you to come to gamble in Macau, you have to, first of all, be quarantined for 14 days. Be let off of quarantine. These are not pleasant experiences, regardless of how fancy the room is or how bad the room is. This is unpleasant. You're jailed for 14 days. After you come out, you have to come and gamble for 3, 4, 5 days. And then when you go back to Hong Kong or you go back to China, you have another 14 days to look forward to. To go through 28 days of quote-unquote imprisonment can only attract the super hardcore. So what you're seeing today is deceptive compared to what happens in the future, which is when the quarantine will be lifted, there will be some people coming back. Will they come back to the same level as before? No. A typical high roller, for example, who would have come 6 times a year, 3-night stay, would now come 4 times a year, maybe 2-night stay. That doesn't sound like that much of a change, but think about it. 6 times 3 is 18-night stay versus 4 times 2, which is 8 times stay. They're going to make 50% less of a contribution. That's where the effect is going to be felt. Will the mass come in here anytime? No. The hardcore VIP, the high rollers, the premium mass will lead the way. They are much less likely to be affected by the virus. They will be affected, but not to the same level as the regular mass players. But eventually, people will kind of come in there. I just want to make sure this will not go back to the junkets only or the super high roller only. If anything, some of the mass will replace some of the higher end premium mass in that they will be taking up some of the hotel rooms that are not going to be occupied by the same level. These people would like a free room, and now it's available to them.
Now I'd like to talk with Alidad briefly, and then before moving on to Carlos, who will be more focused on corporate social responsibility. But there's a political factor here, surely. And we've been taking note of what, say, for instance, community leaders have been saying about the role to be played by casino operators during the crisis. And, of course, the Chief Executive Hoya Tseng. What's your take on the overall political and social environment with regards to the role of casinos operators? Alidad.
I think the operators, more than anything, they're businesses. They're not here to go and hug people and make and generate beautiful feelings. If that was the case, they would not be into gaming. Let's not forget that gaming is, as much as we like to use the word gaming, it's really gambling. So I just don't believe that there is a goodness and a humanity associated with this. If that was the case, there would be a different business. However, these are business people and they have to survive. And this is the time where the licensors are due. The licenses will be renewed in 2 years and a couple of months. These people have that short-term. By no means am I disparaging the operators. I'm just saying the nature of the business is not a business of humanity. We're not here to advance human skills and scientific reasons. I think just for that alone, that reason alone, the fact that there is something that the chief executive holds above their head, which is the renewal license, they will do anything the chief executive will ask them to do. And if that takes them to go ahead and donate masks, donate hotel rooms, donate labor, they will go do that. It's just a matter of what the chief goes and asks. If you recall, about 3-4 weeks ago, the chief executive was very disappointed, saying, I'm sick and tired of these applause and these nice newspaper ads saying, we support you. Why don't you show it to us by giving us hotel rooms? Because I don't want to have 11 different hotel rooms throughout Macau for the quarantine. Give us one. In the end, Sands came through and Sheraton came through and provided one of the hotel rooms. But it was only done through prodding by the chief executive. So I just don't see the companies doing this without being led. And what I've seen so far from the chief executive of Macau has been nothing but great leadership through whether it's wearing masks, whether it's taking this business seriously, whether it's the quarantine, quote unquote lockdown. It wasn't really a lockdown, but taking this very seriously from day one has been quite effective. And if he leads the concessionaires through sheer force of the renewal and the fact that they may lose their license, will follow in marching steps just because the chief executive has demanded it of them.
Interesting point. Carlos, this brings us and paves the way to your study and what you've been looking into with regards to corporate social responsibility of the casino operators. As we speak and as the situation is unfolding, you are leading a research on that, on how casino operators are coping with it and what they've been doing with regards to CSR. So I'd like you to talk about that and kind of illustrate how you regard this whole question.
Okay, thank you, Jose. And Alidad, thank you very much for perfectly opening a very nice path for me to address a few points which you have mentioned. And especially, for instance, in the beginning, you mentioned that casinos, they are losing a lot of money. That is very true. And also, you mentioned about the nature of the gambling business, all right? And also you mentioned about their reaction after the chief executive has prodded. Then they did something like releasing, lending out or renting out. I don't know if it's lending or renting out, say, quarantine rooms, all right? Okay, but it's a very good time for us to really think about the nature of this kind of business and its relationship with corporate social responsibility, CSR, and also, in fact, when a business itself is controversial in nature, so in fact, what can it do? What can it do, right? So I'm going to show you some slides, okay? So please allow me to switch to a share screen, right? And is it okay?
Yes.
Right. Can everybody see the title of this presentation? Okay, all right. So I'm going to make a presentation about some theoretical issues and also some data that we have collected during this crisis period. And I use a theoretical lens to explain, okay, try to explain what, how does sociology of worth, okay, I will explain a little bit about this issue. How does it actually explain the case of the gaming operators or the gaming industry during such a great crisis, right? All right. Okay. So firstly, people in Macau, in Hong Kong, or in many places, we often take, especially people in Macau, very often take for granted that, okay, gambling is in Macau generating most of the income and so on, right? But, well, no matter you call it gambling or gaming, so in the academic literature, we often call this kind of industries controversial or contentious, right, industries, because they may kind of, as you can see here, elicit some offense when they are publicly presented. But of course, in Macau, probably many people do not realize that, well, gambling is something controversial, right? But in fact, it is, okay? And, well, as you can see, there could be social taboos or moral debates or some political pressures, all right, coming out from this kind of industries. Right? And, okay, in the past, right, different types of controversial industries were studied, okay? Like, for instance, brewing, gambling, tobacco, defense, nuclear energy, weapons, this kind of so-called controversial industries. And they continue to exist, but how do they really continue to exist? So, say, for instance, if you compare recent research, not recent, previous research about the tobacco industry, all right? So tobacco industry, for instance, is itself a very contentious and controversial industry, but tobacco manufacturers, they might do something like packaging or even invent some less harmful tobacco, all right? But think about the case of gambling. There's nothing that you can do, like, for instance, right? In fact, the so-called less harmful tobacco is a lie, of course, all right? But the point is, you cannot have something which is less addictive gambling. So therefore, gambling has to do other things in order to diversify, like you mentioned previously about, say, they need to diversify into other areas, okay? So therefore, comparing these different kinds of industries, you can see what we call so-called normal industries, right? Or normal businesses. They can use what they are competent. For instance, like you see Microsoft. Microsoft is an IT company, right? So it's good in IT and this kind of stuff, and therefore it can do philanthropy through, say, sponsoring educational programs or computer education, okay? So they can use their core competence to actually release the power of their CSR, okay? But think about the, say, tobacco or gambling industry. So what kind of core competencies do they have, right? So therefore, comparing so-called the normal and controversial businesses, the way that they do CSR could be quite different, actually, right? And here, I would like to introduce two concepts, right? Well, corporate social responsibility, I think many people have learned about this issue, right? But, well, one way of looking at CSR is that this CSR is related to the self only. So this is like here, what we call the self-related perception of how particular stakeholders, right, feel, right, CSR is addressing their own concerns, right? But we do also have situations like, for instance, say, how well, right, the organization or the company is serving other people's needs in terms of CSR. So therefore, we have self-initiated or other related CSR perceptions, right? So we would like to borrow this idea and then extend this to the gaming industry, because by nature, as you can see here, the industry itself is by nature controversial. So therefore, the only thing that this kind of industry can do is to use, say, CSR to obtain approval. So Alidad mentioned that, okay, the casinos, they are doing business. This is exactly the correct, of course, right? It's true, is it? But in order to continue to do business, they need to obtain approval. And the only thing that they can do is to use CSR as a way to obtain continuous approval from different stakeholders so that they can do their business as usual, right? So like Alidad just mentioned, is it the casinos, they continue to operate and make money, is it? So therefore, we see something like a cycle, okay? So the controversy is generated by the business itself, but how does it regulate itself? Say in Macau or in many places, you know, responsible gaming campaigns are very famous, right? But this is done as a kind of CSR because the nature of the industry itself is controversial. But when it relates to other people, say for instance, say if we just use the example of Macau, right? So other residents who are not gamblers, okay, they will say that, okay, this casino is making a lot of money. What about you doing other things? Okay, because responsible gaming campaigns are only for those gamblers, okay? So therefore, other related CSR such as charitable donations and philanthropy, these kind of things will happen so that the operators can continue to operate and continue business as usual, right? So this is the idea about this self and other related CSR, right? Okay, so we have 4 rather common theories that we often use to explain CSR in different industries, right? But in terms of the gaming industry, say they depend on resources, all right? And the most important resource, as you know, is like what Jose has mentioned about, say, license and renewal of licenses, all right? To obtain legitimacy, right? So legitimacy means that that the company or the business is in line with the social value of the society, right? So therefore, it has to do something in order to, say, raise its legitimacy in society, right? And also, it has a lot of social contracts with other stakeholders, such as customers, government, workers, employees, and so on. And one other way of describing CSR could be, say, a way of doing impression management. Right? So given all these issues, CSR is therefore very important, as you can see, and very emphasized by the gaming industry, right? So that is the point. Right? Now, I borrow from my co-researcher and also colleagues Leung and Snell. So actually, they published their research in 2017, okay, about Macau gaming firms, and using the lens from legitimacy and stakeholder theory. Okay, so actually Macau gaming firms, they have been orienting their CSR toward the more powerful stakeholders. So in this case, you can, well, think about who is the most powerful stakeholder, right? And signal their CSR to the government to reduce social impact. But at the same time, because the nature of the industry itself is controversial, so they often may downplay quietly because they do not want to deter their main customers. Right. So now let's turn to the crisis. Right. Now there is. I would like to introduce the lens that we are using to look into what is happening, which is a conceptual, a so-called sociology of worth, which was promoted by two French philosophers or sociologists, all right, Boltanski and Devenant. Right. So using this lens, okay, we can understand that everything in our social reality, they are ordered, okay? But whenever we have a disaster or a crisis, then this crisis or disaster will challenge the society's attitude, which is like, for instance, many people take for granted that gambling is taken for granted as the money generator. Right. But when there's a disaster or crisis, the order of things can be shifted, okay, or the assumptions will be challenged, right? And another issue is about the so-called common good, right? That is to say, Macau people often mention about, say, we are sharing the economic result, okay, or the economic harvesting the economy or something like that. Okay, sharing the goods, the good result of the industry, of the economy or whatever, right? But when there is a crisis or disaster, then this kind of reasoning will change, okay, and become multiple, and then different worlds will have different insights into the worth. Okay, so therefore, like for instance, one research I would like to briefly introduce to you is that Perkins and Mormon, they applied this idea about common good and sociology of worth into the case of, say, for example, remember 2005, there was a hurricane in the U.S. in New Orleans, Katrina, which was, so disastrous that we could use the lens and look at what happened pre-Katrina. So at that time, all right, so the economic worth had compromised with the civic worth. Like for instance, okay, so tourism and environment, they compromise, and the industry and so on, all right? Okay, everything went well, right? But when there was a disruption by the hurricane, the worth of another world, which is the domestic world, related to the civic world, became disrupted, okay? And therefore, all these things like industrial worth, economic worth, market worth, okay? So all of them, they shifted, okay? And did not have the compromise, right? But after the Katrina, okay, things started to, redevelop, okay? But it really took a long time, right? And the main issue at that time was the industrial worth was deficient because many people criticized that the government was not doing enough to help the post-Katrina New Orleans, right? But at the end, finally, the different worlds, okay, different worlds, they try to come back to a compromise, and reconstruction was eventually achieved, right? So what we want to do is that now, if we can apply this concept into the situation, let's think about pre-COVID-19 Macau and the gaming industry, right? So when everything was going well, the economic worth and the civic worth, right, compromised, right? And how did the gaming operators continue to exist? So they use CSR to gain or maintain or to protect the social license, right? But people in Macau always talk about sharing or enjoying altogether the economic result, right? So therefore, the stakeholders, they also compromised, right? Because we depend on them, they also depend on us, okay? So like Alidad also mentioned about the local labor supply, right? And also that is also a kind of resource dependence, right? But now we are in the COVID-19, right? So if you can see here, seems like that many casinos adopted the business as usual strategy until some kind of really tremendous kind of requirement, like for instance, the shutting down of the casinos or the whatever non-issuance of visas and so on, okay? They seem to be doing business as usual, right? And the idea is that, well, they continue to use, right, even after the shutting down and the stopping of the issuance of the visas, right? The casinos continue to do make monetary donations to maintain legitimacy. So therefore, that's why the economic worth and the civic worth did not compromise, okay? And therefore a crack occurred, okay?
Carlos,
so now the problem, yes.
Carlos, we would,
yes.
in the coming round, because you have some very interesting figures and data to show us, we'll go back to actually what's been going on, the deeds of the operators. So now I would bring Oscar back into the conversation. Oscar, still talking, I'd like now to hook up this issue of corporate social responsibility with another idea of strings attached to what one could expect to be, let's say, for instance, an extension of the current concessions and sub-concessions. So we will have, of course, the post-COVID-19 world and of Macau's gaming industry, and we also look into the post-2022 situation when it comes to the gaming concessions and sub-concessions. What do you think is more likely to happen?
Yeah, thank you, José Carlos. Before I reply to your question, let me just try to wrap up and to just to say a few things about what Alidad and Carlos just mentioned. Regarding, I mean, we all agree and we are all in the same page that business is really, I mean, dropped dramatically, and that gaming operators are being really pressed in terms of manpower costs and, of course, other costs. I heard, I'm not sure, perhaps Alidad have other figures, but I heard that there are some gaming operators with costs close to 100 million US a month to support and to pay salaries to their people, to their staff. We also know that Macau operations are quite expensive if we compare it, for instance, with US operations. I'm talking about salaries and HR costs. But in fact, companies used to, and we all know that casinos have deep pockets, but they have deep pockets if they have, if there's any clients, there's people coming in. Besides, gaming operators in Macau are being pressed, like Alidad said, and this is not comparable to other jurisdictions like the US, for instance, where the government, where in the states, they don't have the regulators, they don't have these kind of pressures maintaining all locals' jobs, all people's jobs. In Macau, gaming operators, they suffer this in their skin, or at least they're suffering this in their skin. But I think that the Macau government should also play a role on this. Macau government is doing a lot, like Alidad said. I agree with that. I agree with him when he says that the chief executive is playing a very important role in all this circumstance. He came with very strong measures. We all support that. We all recognize that. But we need to go one step further, okay? If jobs need to be maintained with this amount of costs, with the amount of revenue that companies are having for the time being, I believe that the government should play a role on this as well. Some responsibility should be shared by the government.
And Oscar, this could be translated into what kind of additional measures? I know that you've been looking into what's been going on in other gaming jurisdictions. Have you got a couple of suggestions that perhaps the government could embrace?
Of course, and this goes to your question. Of course, that the first idea would be let's bring something to the concessionaires and let's extend their license within the limitations of current legal framework. That will be possible, of course, but that will happen in 2 years only. If happens, it will happen in 2 years. What we do until then? Well, first of all, I think there are two very important and easy measures to put in place, taking in consideration, for instance, that Macau SAR has strong financial resources. So, for instance, why is not possible to cut the gaming taxes? The game tax, the special game tax, plus the contributions the gaming concessionaires paid for Macau Foundation and other institutions. We're talking about, with the exception of SJM, of course, we're talking about 39% of GGR. Okay, GGR is really low. I mean, we don't
gross gaming revenue.
It's a 90% drop in March. So companies need to have money. How can you continue maintain this with no revenue? So taxes should come down. And besides this, I'm not comparing realities. I'm not comparing jurisdictions. But I can give you the example, for instance, of Spain. Spain is one of the most affected countries in the world. Definitely, after Italy, it's the second most affected country in Europe. Well, if you don't think that UK is no longer within the Eurozone. But Spain has considered some protection and some plans to support tourist operators and casinos by paying, assuming 70% of the salaries of these people. So this would be possible to do in Macau. This will be possible to be sustained and to be sponsored by the Macau government, because either the Macau government has the resources, and is also pressing local operators to keep this pace, which I also defend, taking in consideration, again, the scenario we're living in Macau and the capabilities of Macau government and the circumstances and the idiosyncrasies of Macau social system and industry. But again, the government needs to play a role on this. And extending the concessions may be an option, although I don't think that should be used as an excuse for the extension, because at the end of the day, 18 years have passed. Companies have been highly lucrative during all these years. They distribute their profits through its shareholders. They generate enormous amounts of cash. So I don't think that this would be an excuse for the extension. It can be made, of course. It can be made. It's understandable, but I don't see an exact match for that. Again, if the extension happens, it will happen within almost 2 years, but until then, there's 50,000, 60,000, 100,000 people to pay salaries in Macau, and that's what we need to make sure right now.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Plenty of food for thought, and I would like now to open the floor to our attendees, to our participants. We have now online around 60 participants who are joining us now. So I invite them to raise the hand, as they say on Zoom, and to join us for any quick remarks and, of course, questions to be asked to our guest speakers.
Zé Carlos.
Yes.
Zé Carlos. Sorry. Allow me just to say that. Allow me just to say that I was talking on the government side. I think that gaming operators shall also play a role on this. Okay, but we can leave that for later on.
Sure. Thank you. So I'd like to again invite the attendees. So if you've got any questions which you believe are yet to be addressed in this session, in this webinar, I do have a written question which was sent by Pedro Cortes. Is a question to all panelists. One specifically, he addresses this one, I believe, to Alidad Tash. What would happen to the foreign mainland Chinese workers? Is the People's Republic of China interested in having some thousands of unemployed back home? Who would like to take this question first? Alidad.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question from Pedro. There is a hierarchy, as I mentioned earlier, and the hierarchy within the lower level positions. I'm talking about a room attendant, which is really what the hotel maid is. That hierarchy has already been shown to favor mainland China as opposed to the non-Chinese. In fact, the government has directed, maybe a softer word would be, has suggested that operators be more likely to let go, whether it's temporary or permanent, lay off a hotel room attendant from Philippines than mainland China. That's already been made clear. The question is, will it ever reach there? And it's a matter of what you want to cut. This is a tough decision. Do you want to get rid of your eyes, or you want to get rid of your ears, or you want to get off your hand? These are very difficult, painful cuts you have to make. You just have to go and find out in which order you have to do that. And they've already made a determination that the PRC, the mainland Chinese, are going to get more preferential treatment when it comes to some of the lower level positions. As to what Oscar was mentioning earlier about the concessions, I see your point of view about these gaming companies and you want to support these industries. However, there is a lot of geopolitics involved in this that has to also be addressed.
That's kind of the elephant in the room.
Exactly, exactly. And when the president of a confrontational nature takes out the word coronavirus and replaces it with the word Chinese virus, when there's a lot of blame being placed on China and where the source and all these bizarre conspiracy theories we're all receiving, it doesn't look good for the government to go ahead and reward 3 of the 6 operators, which happen to be American as well. That's not very good politics. And these are companies that make a lot of money. I'm not saying they shouldn't be helped. I'm saying that it's within the order of things to be helped, the average citizen, the average worker, the average non-casino worker, that person deserves far more assistance than some of these larger, one of the richest men or some of the richest men in the world, some of them being the people who go and single-handedly are the biggest contributors to the same man who goes and crosses out that word and replaces it. That is also something to be considered in here. That is a card that has to be played, and that is precisely why I believe, just for that reason alone, and the fact that these guys are all behaving so fantastically. These are brilliant kids who want their dessert, right? Mm-hmm. When you offer a nice chocolate cake, every kid's going to behave fantastic, finish their meal. Why give the dessert now and have these guys become unruly? Hold it for another 5 years and enjoy this calm and peace that comes in, because you're literally holding this and everybody is being obedient. So this is a completely different look from Ashka. Will it come to a point where there has to be some tax relief? Perhaps, but at this moment, they got a little bit more money to burn before people actually start empathizing with them.
Thank you, Alidad. So Carlos and Oscar, it seems that the upper hand is not in the operator's side. Is that the case? Carlos, Carlos, Oscar, would you like to join us and also bring into the picture the geopolitical side?
I agree with Alidad. Of course, there's the matter of geopolitics that, especially with the background you just mentioned, who is behind one of the major, if not the major, gaming operator in Macau, what this person represents for the current president of the United States and so on. But still, I don't challenge that. I totally agree with you. But I've seen, the way I put things is that if we don't support who is going to pay the salaries, who is going to be the triggering and is the most important industry in town, I'm afraid we can be difficult if we leave these people, these companies to themselves, we may not be on time to save the industry. I trust that this is a very, very difficult balance. But again, even if we look from that perspective, there are two remaining companies, private companies, with the same origin, let's say, or initial origin, that don't share the same kind of responsibility. And the people working for this particular company we are mentioning, the locals, they, at the end of the day, they're not guilty. They cannot be liable for the actions of their top management back in the U.S. That's my only issue. But again, I totally understand with you. I totally agree that this became much more than just a commercial issue. It's geopolitics. It's so important worldwide that the impact it's very difficult to analyze.
So I'm not saying that they should not help them. I'm just saying we're not there yet. There is a lot more step that has to go, and there's a lot more people that have to be fed. And the Chinese, mainland Chinese, who contribute a lot to the $36 billion that were lost in gaming revenue, they need some support as well before you go ahead and you go. And you're right. By the way, none of these actions by the various companies are illegal. Every single one of these things are being very transparent about it. It just so happens that we're in the middle of a geopolitical war. There's lots of chances of confrontation, whether it's political, whether it's military. And these things, you don't want to go and give out something. You don't want to play your best card just yet. You want to hold it a little bit longer before you're forced to go ahead and, quote unquote, use your trump card.
So we've got a couple, more than a couple of more questions from our participants. There's one question which I think is in everyone's mind. How long do you believe the quarantine requirement will remain in Macau? This is a question by Benny Mancino, who's joining us. Carlos, you want to take a chance and make a guess, so to say?
Well, that's an interesting question, but it all depends on the situation now. Okay, in the United States and Europe, because according to the reports, China is recovering, and but this has become a global issue, not only a regional issue. All right, so it's difficult to say, but I'm not in a good position to answer this question. But I'm interested actually to answer Pedro's second question. Actually,
Sure. Go ahead.
He sent into the chat box. Can I do that? Because Pedro, you made a very good point, saying that Macau government has already given the casinos 5 years already, an extension, is it? Okay. So if they do well during, say, you mentioned this 1.5 years time, okay, then is it a good gesture to kind of say renew the license or something like that? So in this, please allow me to share actually my post-COVID slide. Okay. Sorry about this. Okay, so maybe this here could bring some food for thought to your question, right? Are you, sorry, are you, okay. Anyway, you can see it, all right, so I cannot enlarge this, I don't know why. But anyway, the idea is that, okay, after the, okay, say if the quarantine stops, after the crisis has, okay, you may say finished, but many people are saying that this will not finish in 10 years or 15 years, is it? But are the gaming operators still using the business as usual strategy, or are they going to look into a new social reality? So, and should they really reevaluate what is the meaning of CSR? Is it CSR is the tool that they are using to maintain and gain and to protect their social license? Is it? So, is that CSR that they have in their mind the kind of CSR that we have in our mind? And people of different stakeholders position, like employees, okay, customers, suppliers, okay, right? Are we having the same sense of CSR, right? So that is why I suggest that actually there should be more kind of a civic, as you can see, I emphasize here, civic private government partnership, right? So there should be a kind of a more communication between the three parties and try to reconcile their different worlds and to reconcile their different words, right? But of course, in terms of solid actions, if you ask me what kind of solid actions, I cannot provide at this moment, all right? But the idea is that the COVID-19 situation provides us with a very good chance of rethinking our social reality, our taken for granted worths, and what should we think about, okay, think about what is after that, okay, if the world can continue to operate and run. So can we think of some new social realities and try to reconcile each other's worths? Okay, that is maybe some avenues for new thinking. Right?
Thank you, Carlos. And now I'd like to share with you, with the panelists, a few more questions. Actually, we are having some great feedback from our participants. I'd like to now go into a question by André Roldão, AAA. There's a very large quantity of businesses that depend on the gambling companies as service providers and consultants. How much will be the impact on them, and how will that impact Macau's economy? Alidad, Oscar, which one of you would like to?
Alidad, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's going to affect them, but nobody's crystal ball works. This is going to be quite devastating, and I believe that is one of the examples, for example, where the government should first take care of its citizens, and amongst them are all the local vendors that provide services, whether it's food, whether it's services, laundries. These people will be affected far more before it goes to the companies, which will be the final step. They will be affected, but how much, nobody knows how deep this virus is and whether or not there is a round two. There is a resurgence. Is there going to be a mutation? Nobody knows at this month. And we're just basically in the second quarter, and we got 4 quarters to go in a game, and we don't even know what's coming up next.
Oscar and Carlos.
Yeah, from my side, I think that without, disagreeing from Alidad, but I think everyone has more or less the same problem with different scales. Of course, I understand that the government already put in place some measures to help citizens and to inject money in the economy, and also smaller companies, smaller enterprises. I think that's already very good, and it's a very good reaction and a measure taken by the government. But allow me to go to someone's question. I think it was José Miguel Encarnação who mentioned.
Yes,
who mentioned
exactly. The junket strategy.
The junkets.
José Miguel is
asking. The junkets. They're one of the entities. But I will go also a little bit further to talk what will be the role of the gaming concessionaires also with this issue. What can be done for them? I mentioned already what I suggest for the government to do, but then we have the other side. We have the gaming operators, which are the gaming professionals and the gaming related companies. And I tend to include the junkets in this equation because at the end of the day, gaming operators have been doing a lot since day one, since the end of the monopoly. But we don't see that much actions from the junkets, and we know they share an important slice of this big pie. From the gaming operators' point of view, I would say that it's important for them to try to offer a different, or to adapt themselves, to try to offer a different product to their clients. So a new era is coming, a new normal is coming, like we said. And I don't believe the companies will have the same capacity to bring new customers and to attract customers, because we all agree that they should and to come to Macau and to take the risk of getting infected. So I think companies should start thinking in new options. What can be newly offered to clients, either from a gaming point of view or a non-gaming point of view? We understand from the last years that Macau clients will start showing some appetite for non-gaming activities, or at least it will be complementary to the gaming activities, to the gaming consumption. So I think companies should look at it very carefully to try to bring families. Okay, again, the high roller is important, of course, but he would like to bring his family and to offer something new for these people to come to Macau. This is one important thing to be made. Another thing is, how about the gaming operators look for solutions with respect, for instance, outsourcing or avoiding people to come to work and to create strategies and infrastructures for people to work more from a remote location. I'm not talking about remote location outside Macau. I mean within Macau, of course. But trying to relocate the way people work and the way people see things. With respect to junkets, junkets, they don't play any role in CSR activities. I don't remember, there's a few of them, of course, giving a few checks and so on, and masks, but that's not the roast beef we are talking about. That's not the the most important part of CSR activities. So I think the government should also pay importance to junkets and the way the junkets are going to contribute to this change.
Talking about junkets and CSR, Carlos Noronha, in your research, what have you found so far with regards to junket operators' engagement and involvement in corporate social responsibility during this crisis?
Yes, actually, our research we have collected data concerning the 6 big operators as well as junkets, right, and as well as other say non-profit organizations also, and we can probably make a comparison in the future.
Junkets are quite profitable.
Yes, and we collected data that junkets, like what Oscar mentioned, they only gave a few checks and gave a few masks, okay, and that's real, that's true, okay, but maybe let me also. I think, Jose, you want me to show...
Oh, yes. I had a sneak peek of that. It's very interesting stuff, okay. Data.
Yes. All right. So just now, I mentioned that we collected some data, all right? And this data, until quite recent, just a few days ago, right? So we used kind of content analysis that is collecting data from the media, from different kinds of media, from newspaper, websites, and also TV reports, newspaper reports, and magazines, and etc. So here you can probably, of course, I cannot show the names of the concessionaires, but you can see that apart from money and medical supplies, right? So you can see that there are many other areas that the operators and the junkets and so on should actually put emphasis also. Like, for instance, job security. So say one operator hired a certain number of construction workers, right, during this situation, right? But the others did not have some very solid kind of job security measures, right? Although, of course, from the web or from somewhere in the air, we hear a lot about this no pay leave issues, stories, and so on. Okay, but really, some solid kind of job security issues were not addressed enough, right? Local business support, right? So just now, someone asked a question about what is the impact. So the impact, as Alidad mentioned, is tremendous, is it? So many companies, small businesses have closed down, and some of these concessionaires, they do try to support the local business in the form of, say, buying from local business and so on. But, well, you know, later on, maybe, if possible, I can share the figures, but at this moment, I cannot, right? But you see, these are the easy things that can be solved by money. You can see donating money or buying medical supplies, supporting local business. These are the easier things of CSR, that is a low level of CSR, that is simply donation, things that can be solved by paying money. Is it? But like, for instance, say other areas such as what about family care support? What about other issues? Because stakeholders, talking about stakeholders, there are so many stakeholders, right? So you can see that, well, you look at some examples, say, monetary donations, okay, they give out the money to China or to some local associations, to schools and so on, right? medical supplies, they hand out some masks, okay. Job security, some of them are doing some quite rather good jobs, like for instance, say, doing training and doing retraining, virtual classrooms, talent development, these kind of things, right? But, well, as some of you also mentioned that they are really doing business, is it? So if they do not lay off people, that is already, well, a kind of I don't know, a kind of CSR. But as you can see from that table that I'm showing, that most of the CSR maintained at the so-called philanthropic level, that is just giving out money, right? So
and medical supplies
and medical supplies. Although we know it's very difficult to buy masks nowadays, okay, but these large companies, they should have some tricks. I don't know, okay, but
that's interesting.
So that's what they have done.
I want to just point out something interesting that
go ahead, Alidad.
I want to point out that about a month ago, a junket, we were talking about junkets earlier. A junket actually did the opposite. Instead of helping, they laid off 200 of its workers. Yeah. And the next day, the chief executive forced the CEO of the company to go and take back the 200 people. So if anything, these people have yet to be very pro-worker. And again, the other one, to be fair to them, they don't own a physical entity. They don't own a property. They only have their own individual operators. And again, that's how we found out the chief executive really means business, when he was able to go ahead and convince the operator to turn things around.
So we have more questions. One from Tash, Yellow Star. We hear a lot about the necessity of economic diversification, but casinos are not willing to invest in local companies with regards to arts projects, for example, sponsor venues or platforms to make and to market the projects. So how realistic is a change in the near future? I think this is related to SMEs and specifically in the cultural industries.
Again, it's not a practical question. This whole non-gaming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this brings us to non-gaming. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Here's what is so unfair. In Las Vegas, 50% of all revenue comes from gaming, 50% comes from non-gaming. I'm using approximate numbers. 6 billion in gaming revenue, 6 billion in non-gaming revenue. In Macau, we have 36 billion in gaming revenue. To use percentages and say, hey, go and be just like Macau, like Las Vegas, and be 36 billion in non-gaming, it's simply not going to happen. So does Macau have more room to be non-gaming? Yes. But if you put a gorgeous museum over here, people are not going to come. People in China, in mainland China, can go to fantastic restaurants, can go and have amazing shopping, can go see great museums. They don't need to come to Macau for that reason. The only reason they come to Macau is for gaming and some other sins that are committed. So to expect these people to become suddenly family-friendly because you just put an art exhibition, it's dead. I've been to some of the operators' art exhibitions, and it's always quiet. I'm the only person sitting around and watching. So you have to recognize that it's just not reasonable to use this bizarre 50-50 or more non-gaming. Every operator would love to have more non-gaming, but how practical is that?
Thank you, Alidad. Nuno Martins is asking, well, specifically is addressing Oscar, considering the substantial costs that the operators are facing on the daily basis beyond, let's say, what you were suggesting, some tax breaks or benefits. What are your expectations with regards to the government policies to restore the financial equilibrium of the concession contracts? And this can be extended to other panelists as well. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Nuno Martins. Abraço para ti. I mentioned that one of the other options was, I mean, a kind of sharing of or a package that would include government liability for part of the salaries that are being paid by the gaming operators. If for instance, well, and I don't criticize, let's say, I don't criticize the idea of shutting down casinos and hotels. I think that was appropriate. I think that it's already a note and a very important example to give to other places that didn't choose to have the same kind of measures and were not competent enough to take the same kind of measures. But at the end of the day, if those salaries are still paid, if casinos keep and hotels were closed for a long period of time, and now they're open, of course, but with no people at all, with no clients, or with a very few number of clients, because at the end of the day, people cannot come in without the constrangements Alidad just mentioned of the forced quarantine. Why not the government prepare himself to pay part of salaries of these people that at the same time government requires to be put in to jobs to be maintained, or jobs to be maintained? That's my question. I don't know what will be the percentage. Again, I understand Alidad question that you shouldn't give the sweet to this kid yet. Well, but that's a possibility. Replying directly to Nuno's answer, sharing the cost of manpower. Again, I gave a Spanish example. Perhaps it's too much. Perhaps 70% is too much. Again, Macau is not comparable to Spain, but at least a percentage of those salaries. It's like sharing liability and responsibility and showing commitment to Macau population as well.
I have something to add. Most people are under the assumption that the Macau government has not been helpful to the gaming operators. I disagree. Macau, with only 45 cases so far, is one of the quote-unquote cleanest locations on earth. Yet, it is subject, a person from Macau has to go through a 14-day quarantine to enter Guangdong, literally 3 miles from here, 3 kilometers from here. Macau does not require the same from mainland China. Macau can easily enforce its 14-day quarantine to every single country in the world, and yet it has gone out of its way and allow mainland Chinese to come to Macau without being subjected to this draconian 14-day quarantine that a Hong Kong person, a Taiwan person, a Korean, a Singaporean is subjected to. That's already something. And we know this virus originated from China. And to go and take that risk and allow these people to come in here without the 14-day is already a gift to some of these operators. I'm not saying Macau should not do it yet. I'm simply saying we're not there just yet. There is a lot more to go. There's a lot more money sitting in the coffers of these companies that can be extracted. And once the business are really going under, then the government could do this.
Thank you. Carlos, anything you'd like to add here? I mean, any suggestions for policies? The chief executive, by the way, Mr. Hoyat Seng, will deliver his maiden policy address on Monday. Which will be a pivotal moment, and all eyes are on what will be announced, both in terms of substance and in terms of tone by the chief executive.
Yes, that's true. On 20th of April. Yeah. But actually, Alidad and Oscar, to a certain extent, I agree and also disagree. But it is because in Macau, I would venture a little bit into a little bit of sensitive issues. Okay, so because if you compare the case of Oscar, you mentioned about Spain, all right, and the case in Macau, for instance. So is it the lack of, say, collective bargaining of the employees, or the lack of the law for collective bargaining that is hindering, or not hindering, I would say not protecting the rights of the people who are working in the casinos. So what do you think, Oscar?
In Spain or in Portugal?
In
Or
Macau.
In Macau.
Yeah.
I guess it's the fact
But
that we don't have a trade union law. We don't have collective bargaining arrangements.
Honestly speaking, I don't believe there's a lack of bargaining from Macau workers. I believe that Macau workers have strong means to bargain, and I mean, for those who work in close to the business, they understand perfectly what I mean. I mean, there's a strong pressure and leverage from Macau gaming workers towards their employees. I would say that I never experimented a kind of pressure like the one that is exercised by these kind of employees in other fields of activity in Macau. Of course, there's always the story of David and Goliath, and we all know who is who in this circumstance. But I can give you several examples of the pressure that it's possible to make from the casino workers. They have active and bargaining power, and they are actively supported by Macau administration on this relationship with the casinos. I can tell for sure.
Correct.
Yeah, sure, Oscar. Because my logic is that okay, if you are saying that, say, Macau government could say support a certain percentage of the employee salary, and while Alidad also mentioned that the casinos, they have very deep pockets actually. So what is the legal tool that is necessary to unleash the money from the deep pockets to the people who really need the money? So that is what I was just thinking.
I mean, there's a unless the relationship, the labor relationship between the employer and the employee is terminated, it disappears. I mean, there's an obligation to pay a salary, and without the agreement of the employee and without the termination of that labor agreement, the concessionaires itself are not able to reduce their salary to the employee.
That is precisely, there is no hidden weapon. The weapon is transparent. Casino operators are strongly dissuaded from laying off any employee. And if it does come to a point where employees will have to be laid off, temporarily or permanently, the hierarchy will have Macau locals go last. They will be the last group of people that would be thrown off the airplane, effectively. Are we just there yet? I'm not sure.
I mean, Carlos, I'm not criticizing that. Actually, I would like to see more governments in the world to have this commitment with its population. I'm not criticizing that. That's very good. That's very good, actually. I think that it will be in the perfect world, in the perfect, civilization, governments support people. It's people like this, okay? But the problem is we need to generate resources to pay these people. And if we're not generating resources to pay these people, no matter how rich we are, no matter how the amount of money we earned from the last 20 years, approximately, one day the money will end. One day the deep pockets will not be that deep. And the question is, do we want to reach that phase or not? Do we want to prevent that to happen? Again, I mentioned some gaming operators are spending 100 million US or close to 100 million US in salaries per month.
Yes.
So it's a matter of doing some maths and doing some calculations. What is the cost of this? Is this supportable on the medium term? Is this possible? I'm also raising questions here. I don't know answers. I'm just thinking loud and bringing some ideas to the table. Eventually, I agree with Ali that it's a matter of timing. When is this going to happen? But at the end of the day, if this doesn't change, the pockets, there are no enough deep pockets for this, I would say. That's my conclusion.
Yeah, just want to put some numbers behind this. Last year, Macau governments, the last 2-3 years, Macau has won $36 billion US a year in gaming revenue. 36 billion US collectively between the 6 operators. About a third of them, I'm just being very general, about a third of it goes to labor and expenses. Another third goes to profits, and the other third is other costs. That's 1/3, $12 billion is profit. Let's maybe I'm being too generous, maybe it's 10 billion. That's $10 billion that these 6 companies won last year, the year before that, a little bit less the year before that, 15 billion in 2014. That's a lot of money that's accumulated throughout this process. Now, part of that money has been put back in infrastructure.
That's it.
They spent 5 billion to go make a nice property. But once
money is no longer there.
There's a lot of money that's already been extracted from Macau.
Yeah.
Most of the build has been done. There's very little compared to what has been happening. 90%, 85% of all the money in infrastructure has already been spent. So when you just made $10 billion collectively last year, expecting you to go ahead and pay your employees, at least the local ones, is not unreasonable.
No. At this point, I'd like to ask our participants, our attendees, to fill in the survey that we are conducting while we're holding this Zoom webinar that Rui Cunha Foundation is conducting, so we can learn more about your expectations and also views and also suggestions for future digital talks. And now I would go back to the questions by attendees, by participants. Miguel Queiroz, taking into consideration the last decade of high profits of gaming concessionaires, and this is also pretty much related to what both Oscar and Alidad were talking about, and also taking into account the government's high income from gaming tax, should emergency legislation be approved to protect jobs, as well as during the period of deep crisis, should basic salaries be guaranteed by both employers and concessionaires? Oscar, I think there's a legal issue here.
Well, thank you so much, Miguel Queiroz. Abraço também para si. Obrigado. Long time no see também. Well, I understand Miguel's question because we in Europe, for instance, we need the ways things evolve in Europe from a legislative point of view. I would say are more quick than what's happening in Macau. Laws change more fastly, perhaps most of times in a non-reflected basis, because we don't take enough time to change. We just want to change because we think we need to change, but we don't take appropriate measures to consider if the changes we're making are quite appropriate for that time, and that it serves for a future's purpose. In Macau, for the good and for the bad, things move more slowly, I would say. I'm talking about legal framework and the amendments to the legal framework. Of course, some changes may be considered. For instance, if the gaming tax lowers, the law needs to be changed, or at least a provisional amendment needs to be made. From a labor law point of view, I don't think for the time being that is needed. The minimum wage is a long-term discussion in Macau, as you know better than me, Miguel. But honestly, I don't think that will be appropriate. For instance, the people working, the locals, Macau residents working for a gaming industry, they earn, much more than what the minimum wage would be, or the acceptable minimum wage would be in Macau. For those that are non-local, unfortunately, they are not that well protected. And probably for those, yes, this will be necessary, but not because of this incident. Yesterday, I read in one of the newspapers that someone defending that no government in the world treats the locals differently from the non-locals. That's not what's being asked for this. That's not what's being asked. I think locals are being treated very appropriately, I think, by the Macau government. The measures in place are being quite important for locals, and I think they should remain like this. But that doesn't need a change on the legislation. That doesn't require, I would say, a change on legislation from a labor point of view.
Oscar, just an additional note from Miguel Queiroz. He was meaning to say, should basic salaries be guaranteed by both employers and government? Actually, there was something that you were hinting at or suggesting just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, well, yeah, if that's the case, yes. I would say that, yes, that could be, responsibility could be shared. Again, agree with Alidad. For the time being, expect a little bit more, perhaps, yes. We know that, at least for the time being, the gaming operators are in a good, financial situation, so they should be okay with that. But again, on a medium, long term, I don't think this is possible.
As we move, we edge closer to the end of our talk. Now I would look into a question by João Tubal Gonçalves, who is actually a CEO of Rui Cunha Foundation. He tries and bring a different perspective on a question, which would be, what will happen if a vaccine comes quickly? Meaning that, what if we are looking I guess, every single day we're having experts or people saying that, well, we'll have to keep with this lockdown or semi-lockdown environment for several months, or even till into 2021 and beyond. What if we have a vaccine earlier than we were expecting, let's say in 6 or 7 months? What will happen?
Is that the definition of quick? You mean 6 or 7 months?
It was not in his question. It was my own. The question did not mention that. I just mentioned like some people are anticipating that it could come earlier than initially thought, meaning that some experts were hinting at some 12 to 14 months before we have a vaccine ready. What if inoculation on a mass scale can start several months earlier, something like that?
Yeah, well, again, let me attempt to answer it before Carlos and Oscar can do. It's obviously the sooner a vaccine, if a vaccine can be generated. Not everything is guaranteed to be generated. Sometimes there's mutations, there's different strains that are going on. But don't think that vaccine is going to be a wonderful solution without its own problems. Imagine if a company who's out there for profits generates and discovers a vaccine that will cure, obviously inoculate people. Great. How are you going to go distribute it to 5, 6, 7 billion people? Logistically, how would you do that? Just imagine, what is the hierarchy? Who's going to get it first? Is the United States going to get it? What if it's an Israeli company? What if it's an Australian company? What if it's a Spanish company? Who is going to go where? How do you then manufacture, transport? Suppose it comes to a city of 3 million. Who is going to, could you imagine the nightmare of trying to, the lines, the queues that people are going to form just to go ahead and get this vaccine? The mechanisms, the accusations, the favoritisms that is going to happen just within a city to go ahead and administer it to its own people. Second, confrontation, war could break out. I'm not being a conspiracy theorist. I'm not being extremist. This is a big deal that everybody's dying for, literally dying for. And just imagine, it's not as wonderful and rosy and wonderful as it's going to be. It's going to have its own challenging set of operational issues. And hopefully that happens sooner than later. Naturally, we all want this to go away or be mitigated earlier than any other time. But just imagine, you need 7.8 billion people in the world. I think everybody wants it. And what happens in a poor country that can't afford it? How would that be worked?
Thank you. Alidad. Carlos.
Yes. I also have a similar opinion. We have to be very conservative because even if we have the vaccine, it doesn't mean that the central government will maintain the policy of allowing people to come to Macau as before, right? So maybe through this COVID-19 experience, government policies could change, and we cannot have that business as usual paradigm again as before, right? So even there's a vaccine, it doesn't mean that the tourists will be coming back, or they may be going to other places. So, well,
so that
conservative.
That Oscar, I would hook this up with this kind of broader concept of reversed deglobalization or reverse globalization. This has to do, of course, with not only free trade, free movement of people, of capital, of services, of goods, of course. Probably of goods is easier, but when it comes to people and services, is way more complicated.
Well, yeah, it is. But on the other side, and trying to look at the right side of this, if we adapt, again, going back to my the first thing that I've said, if we know how to adapt to this circumstance, we will be able to also find new solutions, find new ways to overtake this. For instance, we have people. I'm in Portugal. I would never be able to participate if in a panel with the three with this distinguished guests and yourself, José Carlos, if we didn't adapt to this circumstance and to try to make it as possible. And today the possible is this, and I hope in the near future everyone from governments to companies to citizens will be able to find ways to continue, because life and the world go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now I'd like to as for a sort of closing remarks kind of question, and Oscar, continuing with you, I think you're looking at a sort of silver lining down the road. So I'd like to wrap this up with a more kind of upbeat tone, if it's possible. So you were talking about something more in general terms, but let's talk specifically about the silver lining for Macau and for Macau's gaming industry. Oscar.
Well, again, we need to understand how deep the crisis will be. When people and Macau gaming industry clients will have appetite to go back, and will be allowed to go back because it's safer and there are no constraints with respect to changes. So it will depend on what's going to happen, and what will be the crisis, the deepness of the crisis. I don't know, honestly. I don't have much more to say with respect to that, because at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen, and I don't have a crystal ball.
That's right. There's plenty of uncertainty. Carlos, your last word on silver lining, on something, if possible, kind of upbeat.
Of course, there's always a hope for reconciliation, but the point is, when do we have this reconciliation? Because, like, for instance, I read the other day that Sands in Las Vegas say 68% of income relies on Macau's operations. So, you know that everything is linked together. So, as I mentioned also just now, that even if there's a vaccine, so if the Chinese government changes policy, then that will also affect Macau and eventually affect the headquarters in the US and other places. So we have to keep a closer eye and watch closely. Yeah.
Alidad, any kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and a silver lining, and a pathway for a sustainable development model for Macau's gaming industry in the post-COVID-19 world?
There is, unfortunately, this thing happened, and there is obviously something that's going to happen. As I mentioned earlier, it's good to have it's an acceleration of something that's about to happen. I think Macau is somewhat immune to this in that the post-COVID Macau will be a lot closer to the pre-COVID Macau, as opposed to Las Vegas before and after, other jurisdictions before and after. But very little silver lining. It's almost like you get in a car accident, you break your bones, you lose an arm, and the silver lining is you lost a little weight. I mean, this is something nobody wanted. It's going to be painful. It gives an opportunity for some of these employees to get rid of the fat. Unfortunately, the fat has gone into the muscle. It's going to be quite painful to come back for some time, but eventually Macau will recover a couple of years down the line.
And hopefully it will bounce back strong, safe, and healthy. That's what we would like to see, all of us. And I'd like to thank you very, very much, Alidad Tash, Carlos Noronha, Oscar Madureira. Truly, truly, truly interesting and fascinating, exciting stuff. Plenty of food for thought. Some of us will be surely willing and looking forward for dinner, others for lunch, and for all of you who've been joining us, the participants via Zoom. Thank you very much for your contribution as attendees, and also for your questions. We could not continue longer because we're running out of time, but surely in future webinars, in future digital talks, surely some of these issues will be further addressed. So thank you very, very much, all of you, for your precious contribution. Stay strong, stay healthy, stay safe. And to all of you who have been watching us and following us on Facebook Live, and those of you who are watching the video on Fundação Rui Cunha's website, thank you very, very much. We will be back soon. I'd like to thank Mr. Rui Cunha, the president of the foundation, Filipe Guadalupe, who's been behind the organization, and all the staff who put up all this brand new experience, which was a fruitful and exciting one for me on a personal note as well. Thank you very much, and see you next time.